We should be live, Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for attending the Strategic Housing Board today. We are still, I think, one person down, but hopefully they will be able to join us before their item kicks off. And if necessary, we can bring them in during that item anyway. So first of all, Alan, Mr. Twyman, can I ask, is there apologies for absence?
Yes, we have apologies for absence from Councillor Madison, and Councillor Oakley Dow is substituting for him. I've also got apologies from Peter Dossad and Sonia Collins.
Welcome, Adrian. I'm sure you'll be able to pick up the threads as we go along. It's not too tough nor odious. I have been in touch with Councillor Madison, who I understand is not very well. So you can send, Adrian, you can send our regards to Tom, and hopefully from speedy recovery.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's no problem. I understand Jackie will be leading on the housing item, so thank you very much for that, Jackie. Okay, declarations of interest. Do I have any declaration of interest? Excellent. I also see that Brian has sneaked in there, so welcome, Brian. Good to see you.
Afternoon.
Item 3 is the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the Strategic Housing Board held on the 27th of January. Is there any items coming from that we're not mentioning later on in the meeting?
Fine.
No, excellent. Obviously, the main item that came out of that was the fact that we were going to call upon an independent panel of financial advisors to educate us today, and it's very pleasing to see that they are with us. We will be welcoming them in due course. Mr. Tom, do we have any urgent items? Hello, Mr. Twyman, do we have any urgent items?
We have no urgent items, Chairman. Also, there are no references from other committees.
Excellent, thank you very much. Therefore, we'll move into what I refer to as our educational period. Can I just welcome all the independent panel that have come along today? First of all, can I just say thank you very much to Brian Downton. He was the poor soul that I approached initially about organising a panel of independent financial advisors to join us today to give us some sort of background on the financial products, opportunities available to people wanting to get onto the housing ladder in Dartford, and possibly give us some ideas how they can, or how we can help communicate the opportunities to residents within Dartford. I would ask if we could, just to kick off with Brian, and then perhaps you can do a quick round of the different financial advisors with us today to give us some idea of who you are and a little bit of your background. Only a little bit of your background, because we are obviously not on a tight schedule, but it would be nice to get finished today. So if I can ask for Brian, if you don't mind kicking off, thank you.
Of course, yeah. Afternoon, everybody. So I'm Brian Downton. I run Downton and Alley Associates. We're a firm of financial advisors in Dartford, financial and mortgage advisors. Been in Dartford 20 years and industry experience over 30 years dealing with mortgages. I'll pass over to Terry or Michelle, whoever's going next.
It's a bit like a relay race. Is Terry, I hate to say it, you're on mute.
There we go.
Well, Terry.
Afternoon. Everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
I apologise. Mortgages is my forte, IT is not, so apologies for that. So my background, I run Urban Sticks Mortgage Solutions. We are based in Dartford. I have been advising on mortgages for the past 15 years, predominantly working in the social housing, affordable housing market. So yeah, looking forward to talking to you today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I work alongside Terry at Urban Sticks Mortgage Solutions. So yes, we specialise primarily within the shared ownership sector, but we also look at normal open market as well. I've worked as a financial advisor for 6 years now, mortgage advice, and I've lived in Dartford for 10 years. And trying to get local residents onto the property ladder is definitely something that I'm passionate about doing with the local residents. Thank you.
Melinda.
Hi, I'm Melinda Bush. I own Quartz Financial Services, also based in Dartford. I've been a mortgage advisor for 15 years. Love serving the local community and helping people get onto the ladder. And in the last few years, still using Help to Buy to make that step up. Also specialised in pensions and investments, but still really passionate about the mortgage market.
Well, thank you very much. I know a little bird has told me that you've actually been communicating with one another and practicing what you were going to be presenting to us today. So can I hand over to you to carry on? Thank you.
Before they do, Chairman, can I just say, with all these mortgage advisors in one place here concentrating on us, I've noticed that all the phone calls in Dartford have stopped. There's been no phones. There are no phones ringing anywhere.
Well, mine just did. So there you go. But there you go. But thank you very much. Over to you, Brian.
Yeah. So all we're going to really present to you today is really, I'm going to run through. So as we've all said, we're all passionate about helping local people get onto the property ladder. A lot of what we do is the very early stages. So we want to talk about that a little bit, and then the other guys are going to talk about the government schemes that are available to help people onto the market. So what I was just going to run through very quickly is we realise that a lot of people are unsure whether they can get a mortgage, and if so, how much. So what we all do it already anyway, but what we would like to offer within the local community is a facility where people can find out what their options are, free of charge, no obligation. So what we're looking to do is give free obligation advice on somebody's borrowing power. So how much can they borrow potentially? What's their credit history? How is that going to potentially affect what they're looking to do? And if there is an issue, how they can solve it, what deposit is required, and how they can tax efficiently save deposits. There's government schemes to actually boost up your deposit if you put it into a certain type of savings. Obviously also explaining all of the government schemes that are available, which the guys are going to explain in a minute, and what other costs to factor in. You know, with a mortgage, I'm sure we all know, you know, there's lots of other things that need to be thought about, valuation fees, solicitors, everything like that, which a lot of people wouldn't realise. So it's really giving that sort of advice to local people, free advice. What we envisage is some sort of panel with us, and there's plenty of other really good mortgage brokers in Dartford, family-owned businesses who work within Dartford, who are just as passionate about as us. So, you know, it's not us looking to corner the market in any way. You know, we're happy for as many local people to be on the list, but just a resource for local residents. That's all I had. So I'm going to pass over to, I think, Terry next. There you go.
Yep. Right. Good afternoon again, everybody. I'd just like to talk a little bit about one of the ways to get onto the ladder, and it's something that I'm quite passionate about, which is shared ownership. Now, part buy, part rent, a lot of people call it different things, but it's one and the same. Where we're looking at getting onto the ladder for a benefit for the clients in the local area is that they know that it's very difficult to buy on the open market sometimes, the amount of deposits they need, where they can get a share of a property, 25%, they could get in somewhere of say 300,000 for around about £5,000 to £7,000, which is a very low amount deposit compared to someone on the open market where you probably need, you know, approximately 40,000 really as a minimum to get into here. So it's a good start for someone to get onto the ladder. I know it hasn't had a lot of good press lately in the local areas with cladding issues, lease issues, but I know a lot of these are being addressed at the moment, especially the lease issues, the new model that the government is bringing out this year that's coming into play, where they can buy a minimum of 10% shares, and they can increase by 1% shares as well, where currently it's a minimum 10% share. So I think it's a really good way to get onto the ladder for people in low incomes and low deposits. So I'll be happy to speak to anybody regarding that issue on that one. Okay. Thank you. So next person.
Melinda or Michelle? Go on, Melinda, you're...
Okay, I thought it was going to be Michelle. I didn't want to jump in. So I'm going to talk to you about the Help to Buy scheme. So with the Help to Buy, following on from what Terry was saying, it really helps people that have got deposits that are a little bit more limited, because people can buy a property. Unfortunately, the Help to Buy scheme is focused on just new builds, but it does mean that they can buy with a 5% deposit, and the government put in the additional 20% deposit in, so it's buying the property jointly with the government. So the government do own 20% of the property. So when this property is sold, the government do recoup 20% of whatever it is sold for. But it really does help people that have got those deposits, which is still a lot of money. So, 5% of 300,000 is still £15,000, which is a lot of money for first-time buyers to save up. But it does mean that it does give them that little bit of a lift of what sort of property they can get, because there's another 20% going in there. Just broadens the options that are available. So whenever I'm sitting with a client and talking to him, I'll always talk to you about what you can get with your deposit if you buy on the open market, and also, did you want to have a consideration of Help to Buy and have a look at what that actually does for your purchasing power. Some people are put off by the fact that the government do own 20%. I think it's really ideal for people who are looking at it as a bit of a shorter term thing, to give them that extra boost and step up onto the property ladder. And maybe their circumstances, they can envisage a change in, say, a few years' time, where they may be able to, if they're at the start of their career and they think that in 5 years' time, say, they'll actually be earning a lot more money and might be able to buy that additional 20% share from the government. It's interest for the 20% that the government own is interest free for the first 5 years. After that, the government do start paying interest on it. But we work with our clients to see, is that the time where you think you might actually move and look at all of your options to own a whole property, or remortgage to actually buy that further 20% share rather than just pay interest, just to stand as you are. At the moment, until recently, it was available for next-time buyers and first-time buyers. The new scheme, the government has just changed the scheme, is only available for first-time buyers, and there's a price cap in the southeast that those properties from the developers can only be a maximum of 437,600. So hopefully it is going to stop that gap getting further away, perceivably, as locals see it. It is the second largest figure in the UK. London is 600,000, and then the southeast is next with that next price cap down.
Thanks, Mel. Really, everyone's pretty much explained about the mortgages side, and I think from all our perspectives, what we want to help residents with is obviously getting on the property ladder, whichever way they can do it. And also, when we're looking at the assessments for anyone who's wanting to get onto the property ladder, it's not something where we do the assessment and then that's it and we leave them to it. I think it's really good to make sure that people are aware that we're in it for forward planning, either from the short term or into the longer term, where some of us have worked with clients for 6, 12, 18 months in order for them to get where they need to be, whereas others, they might be ready and in a position to go straight away. And really, we're not scary, we're not ogres. And I always hashtag with our reviews and stuff, hashtag not just a mortgage advisor, because actually nowadays we're looking at all sorts in relation to the client's life and what they can afford and things like that. So I think it's important for us to try and get as many locals onto the property ladder, but also to make them aware, like as Brian said, that we're not just for advisors. There's lots of great mortgage advisors within the local area, but it's done without obligation. So we can look at where their position is, where they need to be, plan for it, and then go from there.
Okay, thank you. We keep moving around the screen. Thank you, Michelle. I open it to the rest of the board. Does anybody have any particular questions that they would like to ask the financial advice team here today? Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you, David. To all our advisors, thank you for coming. I'm sure it's been explained to you that we're trying in this board to meet lots of different factors into the housing market in Dartford, and we'll be meeting developers. We've already met some of them, but we're going to be meeting more of them in this way going forward. And I want to just talk about that relationship between a potential buyer and a developer and where you fit into that. One of the concerns that local people have is that they constantly talk about being priced out of their own town, that somehow there's a huge demand from outside Dartford, which is pricing them out. My guess is that as local mortgage advisors and financial advisors, you're probably dealing with local clientele. Could you give me a little bit of experience of that? I mean, is it the case that even though people can find themselves equipped with a mortgage, they just can't get on the ladder because the ladder keeps moving, or that when they find a ladder they can afford, there are 20 people ahead of them from Islington, Haringey, Waltham Forest and all the rest of it, who have decided that Dartford's going to be the place because it's close to London and relatively cheap compared to London?
Who wants to jump in there?
I think that is the issue. A lot of people are coming into Dartford because it's cheaper than living in London. Prices in Dartford are obviously then going up. And then what I've personally seen is a lot of locals having to move further out into Gravesend, Rochester, further down into Medway, because then they can actually get more for their money. Regardless of whether that's on the open market or shared ownership or whatever it might be, they seem to be getting more for their money by moving out of Dartford. And unfortunately, I do think the property prices are at a premium. And a lot of the local residents can't afford to be within there. And also with the developments, how many are allocated to affordable housing compared to what's being bought on the open market? Because a lot of them are being, I guess, marketed to outside Dartford. So then what we're looking at is the locals are being priced out because it's more attractive for city workers to actually move into here, but then there's not really potentially that much in way of affordability, say for shared ownership. There might be in a development of say 15 shared ownership properties or whatever the case may be. So I don't know from a development perspective whether that's something that you discuss with the developers and say, right, okay, well, the scheme needs to have at least 50% for affordable housing for local residents. That's just fine.
I wish it was that simple. I mean, the answer is on paper, that's the way it works. But unfortunately, you then have things called viability criteria which come in, which means the developers will say, well, if we do that, it's not viable to build. And that then becomes a material consideration in looking at affordability. And they tend to get what they want. What was interested in is that I'm not sure whether this is even legal, but this is a blue sky kind of committee, really. So if there was a category of our thinking during planning or during the approvals process that said it's not just about affordability that we require allocations, but it's actually private sale, it's private treaty sales, we would like to see an allocation go to local people within a 5-mile or 10-mile radius of Dartford. That presumably would help, would it? I mean, it would at least clarify those properties. I can see developers immediately saying it's anti-competitive because they ought to be free to sell it to anyone who's prepared to pay the most. But if you can get over that hurdle and based on the starting prices that they launch, would that kind of work? Are you aware of anybody doing that?
I'm not. Are you, Terry?
I'm not aware of anybody that's doing that at the moment. Not currently.
No, I am. I was a long time ago. When Crest Nicholson were building in Manchester, in Birmingham, the Birmingham City Council put a strict control on the amount of people that they could sell to for rental, for instance, and how many people that are from the local areas. But this was 10 to 15 years ago, so I'm not sure. Things have changed a lot since then, but Crest got into big trouble with Birmingham City Council for selling too many to renting, because basically you had lots of investors rather coming in and buying up large numbers of flats, because Crest were more than happy to sell them until they suddenly realised they'd sold too many of them. But I think that's quite exciting if I can I can see the chair of the Development Control Board spinning in his grave, which is a worry because he's not dead yet. But you know, yeah, I think that would be great if we could do that. I think certainly worth something we could investigate. Anne, sorry, you wanted to come in.
Just for me, again, give us an idea of what the age profile would be of these people, because I'm interested in, once I'm coming in, is that there going to be extra provision for extra services in Dartford, like the schools and the other services. And the other word I wanted to mention, but might be a subject for debate at a later date, Chairman, is about key workers. With all that's going on, you know, we need people to come and work here in the town. So we need people to be able to afford to live in Dartford and work in Dartford at the same time. Sometimes you can't afford to work where you live, you know, and you have to move out. So just an interest, but I was interested a bit about age profile. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say on the key workers, obviously most of the schemes that the government have launched over the years, a lot of them have been geared towards key workers anyway. Some of the schemes in the past have actually stipulated that you had to be a specific occupation, so a nurse, a doctor, and whatever you'd class as a key worker.
A mortgage advisor. A mortgage advisor.
Yeah. There we go. But I don't think any of them do stipulate that at the moment, do they, Terry? So
not really, not at the moment. I mean, the main priority for most or a lot of the shared ownership is armed forces personnel. They would take it over a local person. So whether they could factor in or be asked to factor in that key worker is then the next priority before people from outside the area. So it's local key workers. Anybody that's a key worker should have priority above people coming from outside the boroughs and local areas.
Yeah.
Well, we're certainly part of the Forces Covenant, but age profile, would you say there are people in there?
I think the age profile really, it's so the type of people who would be typically taking advantage of the government scheme. So if it was shared ownership, if it was Help to Buy, would tend to be younger people with families, whereas the people who would be more likely to buy the developments without using the government help are probably likely to be older because they need a bigger deposit. They would have needed longer to save it up, or investors, and that's where the investors come in. That a lot of investors will just come in and buy as many as possible. So, but yeah, I think the age profile would tend to be lower on the government schemes. So,
agreed.
Did you want to come in at all? Are you okay? No, okay. I think one of the issues with key workers is who exactly is a key worker. I mean, you can say doctors, you can say nurses, but you can also say cleaners, because you can't clean the place. Obviously, it's going to come to a bit of a grinding halt. I have a great concern about investors. I can see a few of the new developments that are planned for my part of the world would be absolutely prime property for investors to buy the whole lot up, even before anybody got a sniff at them. So I'm minded to think if we could find some way of encouraging developers not to simply sell it out to outside organisations. But then, of course, they're in the business of making money from the land, and the only way they can make money out of the land is to sell the property they build on it. Okay, anything else? Because one thing I was keen to come on to is if we have this wonderful resource in the form of financial advice based in Dartford, it's the way of making a bridge between you and the people that might be interested in you. Because I think a lot of people would automatically say, oh no, it's all too much for me, I can't afford anything. And yet if they actually spoke to somebody, and it was easy to speak to somebody, they might suddenly find that their financial situation was not as desperate as perhaps they think it is, and there may be more opportunity than they think. You mentioned a sort of panel. How would you build that up? Obviously, the famous four we have here, the four musketeers we have here today, are wonderful, but I'm sure there are lots of other musketeers out there that would join the party.
I think between the four of us, we could probably quite easily come up with another 10, 15 advisors who work in the local community, who live in the local community, who would be more than happy to provide the service as well, because it is a service that we're just if anything comes of it, great, but it's a service where just providing the advice, just giving people a yes or no. Is there any chance of you doing anything or not? But also, just importantly, if you can't do anything at the moment, what can you do to get there in a year's time or in 2 years' time?
Yeah, it's getting those goals, isn't it? Just getting those goals, and especially with the last year, a lot of people have sort of started forward thinking, and this is where a lot of our inquiries are coming from. Can I afford it? What do I need to do? All that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's good to sort of get those plans in place. And like, as you say, sometimes people are scared to talk to someone about their finances. Yeah. But hopefully people can see that we're not that scary most of the time.
I think it'd be great to have a resource, a web page, whatever, where anybody can go to and just take a pick of a dozen advisors who they can be sure are local, who they can be sure have their best interests at heart, and are just there to help.
Could the council not put some section on their website to maybe sort of have a list of different advisors, or a signpost, or just something that I don't know, I'm not too sure whether.
The noise you just heard was a director falling over with those sort of suggestions, because the problem we have, of course, is endorsement. That's the trouble that councils have got. Yeah. And it's also, you appreciate, just as you can't, I mean, I'm all the small print at the bottom of all your adverts is huge. You imagine what it's like for a council when we say, we can recommend any of these people, but on the other hand, we can't recommend any of them. So it's all very difficult. I think there might be ways of us offshoring it and kind of empowering you to do it, as it were, and I think that's something we'd be interested in. But we have to be so careful about endorsement, almost ludicrously careful, really, because I mean, if I meet someone in the street who asks about Good Mortgage Advisor, I am entitled to say, well, I've seen this advert and seen that advert, and I know these people. But as a council, we're not, and I think obviously there's a corporate difference there. But I think it's something we should be exploring. Could I just ask, if you don't mind, Chairman, another question about access to your services? Would you say it's fair that you could help most people? I mean, is it? I mean, of course, I understand that there are some who are probably financially just not viable, and for them a lifetime of renting or something else is going to be the way. But would you say that there's a route for most people, and if they want to buy, I'm not saying they should buy, but if they want to buy, and does it impact on them? Does it make things worse if they approach you and are refused? If you see what I mean. So in other words, is their credit rating further damaged by flogging themselves out to you and saying, I want to apply for 20 different mortgages? And my final point is there any way that authorities can provide comfort to mortgage providers with some of their products? I'm loath to use those dreadful words about underwriting, but we did that for a while a few years ago with a particular scheme, and it was quite successful, actually, and I don't think we didn't catch a cold on it. I'm not sure whether the FSA framework is the same these days. We're allowed to do it, but would that make a difference with some product providers, that actually, if you've got an authority backing them, it might help?
The new Help to Buy scheme, separate to the new build one, which was actually announced in the budget, which we haven't got full details of at the moment because the lenders haven't come to us with the schemes yet. But that is going to be a different type of Help to Buy, where it doesn't involve the government lending money. The government in the background guarantee part of that mortgage. So that is very similar to what we had a few years ago, and maybe what you're thinking of, Jeremy. So that is coming, but it doesn't help anybody on a lower income. All it's doing is encouraging the lenders to lend at 95%. Now, some could say that, is that a good thing anyway, encouraging lenders to lend at 95%? It's, but it's not going to help somebody on lower income or a key worker get onto the market, but potentially could help higher income, higher earners. So if you had people working in living in Dartford but working in town, on a decent wage, then yeah, that may help them, because they, you know, a lot of the time the hardest thing is the deposit. So as far as their credit history, you know, I mean, I'm sure I'm talking for everybody here. We do quite a rigorous sourcing before we even go as far as introducing to a lender. So it would be very rare for us to go to more than, you know, at the very worst, a couple of lenders, but 9 times out of 10, the lender we would pick in the first place it would go through with, if it's going to go through at all. And if it's not going to go through at all, we won't bother. We won't, because you're right, quite right. It could impair the credit a bit more through too many searches. As far as everybody, I suppose the shared ownership, Terry, brings in more people as more than anything. That is the scheme that really brings in the lower income earners onto the property market.
It does, yeah, absolutely does. Yeah, with shared ownership as well, when we're talking to potential clients, we certainly, as Brian said, wouldn't really do any applications with the lender until we were 99.9% sure it would be going through. We asked clients to provide their own credit report to us, so we don't do any credit searches. So they've done that, so it doesn't impact their credit profile at all, but when they do it themselves. So we can view that credit profile, we can view their current incomes, their expenditure, and then give them an idea. Yes, we do think you should be able to, or could be able to, get a mortgage now. This is what you would be able to do, or you need to go away, save for another 6 months, 12 months, clear your defaults, clear the other credit issues that you've got, and give them guidance moving forward before we did anything like that. So having an impact on their credit profile, I think, would be our least worry. We probably wouldn't have an impact on them at all.
And Jeremy, if I may, I think the scheme you were talking about was when Dartford Borough Council stepped in, almost a little bit like the Help to Buy agency on the bridge development. I've understood from the council, I've had a client that's had to buy her partner out of their property due to the credit directive changes that took place in 2014. Dartford Council stopped doing that, which I think was a shame, because I think it did get the council involved with an investment in the local property, and I think it really did encourage more local people to use that scheme, where the lender was actually Dartford Council. But as far as I understand it, since 2014, Dartford aren't doing that at the moment.
I'm quite interested. Obviously, we have, as I said before, a lot of new homes coming up in the area. I'm thinking, or I'm finding, because my daughter was looking at similar situations, that they go in and the first thing they do, they don't think about necessarily financial advisor. They go to a sales centre. And of course, once they're in the sales centre, all of a sudden it's, will you speak to our financial advisor, etc. And the sales teams tend to forget about little things like service charges. The Taylor Woodward development actually has 2 service charges, one for living on a Taylor Woodward site and another one for living on an Ebbsfleet site. So, and they forgot to mention that, and that was going to be almost an extra £1,000 a year that person was going to have to pay. So I'm quite keen to ensure people almost do a financial health check with a body of people before they actually go into a sales office, so they don't get drawn into the clutches of, oh, it's the wrong expression, sorry, no house builders here. They don't actually then find themselves in bed with that housing developer entirely.
I don't know how much control you as a council you have on that, because I think what you tend to find is most developers will have a deal in the background with a mortgage network or broker. I mean, I'm doing a Help to Buy for a client at the moment who's a son of a good client, so was never going to go anywhere else. But he still had to speak to the mortgage broker that the developer insisted on, which was a call centre in Glasgow. So, you know, and the actual service that he received was pretty much zero.
I think the powerful thing that we can do here is educate and communicate, or communicate and educate. It's in empowering local people with the knowledge that that isn't the way they have to go. And
definitely, yeah, definitely, because there have been quite a few occasions where, developers have said that the clients need to use their brokers rather than the prospective clients understanding that they don't have to use that broker. It's like shared ownership and the Help to Buy. You have to go through your assessment. So yes, you do have to do an assessment with the appointed broker for that, but there's no obligation to actually go with that broker. But then sometimes how it's worded to the first time buyer especially is, it'll go quicker if you use this particular, because they're in-house and actually, the experience is a bit shocking, and it's trying, like as you say, to educate and say, right, okay, well, actually, you don't need to go with me or Terry or Brian or Mel. We're not saying that. What we're saying is make sure that you're happy with the broker that you go with. And I always say to them, go in your gut instinct. If you can trust them and work with them, go with that advisor. But you don't get the same level of service as someone sitting in a call center somewhere that, doesn't have that personal touch or is actually on the end of a phone as and when you need them. We're pretty much on call, would you say, you guys, 24/7, pretty much?
Yeah.
Phone goes sometimes at midnight, still awake, reply to the message, not good, but that's what you do. But it's the education and sometimes it's just because they haven't got that experience, and maybe it's just trying to sort of collectively just say, look, you don't have to go with the first person that you're referred to.
It's interesting, actually, Michelle, because I think you used an expression which I thought was quite interesting, actually. You used the expression signposting. And I think that is possibly something that we as a council can do. I always watch Mrs. Green's eyebrows at this point, because when she is worried about something, they have a habit of moving up and down. It's called a tell, Mrs. Green. But I agree in the fact that we mustn't be seen to be promoting or promoting anyone in particular. But if we can encourage people to come to an independent broking team or board or whatever you want to call it, that I think would be very useful. And it's something that actually will fall into the next subject that we're going to be covering anyway. So it's an interesting, as they say, unique.
Chairman, there's a lot of background noise. I don't know where the background noise is coming from, but I'll cut through it if I can. One of the ways we could offshore that, of course, is to use some of our other existing relationships, like Citizens Advice Bureau. We already have a relationship with Citizens Advice. We already have a relationship with a number of other advisory groups. I think one of the things we might look at doing is trying to fund perhaps a leaflet about house buying and a leaflet about mortgages, and so that they can offer that advice and offshore it from us. I think that's something. I mean, I wouldn't. You've mentioned a particular developer, and they're not here to defend themselves, so I'm not going to do them. I'm not going to get us into further trouble. But the issue, I think, is really that we want people to know that they have the freedom to get a deal that's right for them, rather than be hooked into a sales process, which is, I presumably generates commission. I guess just with nods and shakes, is that what we're talking about here? Yeah. Well, I mean, again, that's pretty worrying, isn't it? And I think what we've got to try and do is perhaps through the Citizens Advice Bureau, maybe ask them to undertake a bit of work, which might be outside their normal client base, but nevertheless, it fits into their general ethos, I'm sure, of saying, could they develop something for us to make it clear to people that they've got choices,
And maybe with the developers too, because it would be good to mystery shop some of your developments to see what they're actually advising new people when they walk through the door, because you might be surprised at some of the wording that is used in order to worry some buyers, because if they see a property that they like, they really want to get that property. And if someone says, well, actually, it's going to be quicker to go with them rather than you have independent advice, then they're going to go and do it that way. So I think Citizens Advice would be a really good option.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think that's been excellent. Is there anybody else that would like to contribute? Adrian, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you all four of you for your contributions. It was, I mean, Michelle's ultimately said what I was going to suggest is that perhaps a little more, what is the word, responsibility from the developers in terms of their signposting and their communication to an obligation, if you like. However, we can find a way to impose that. Yes, we can provide through voluntary organisations and relationships with such as Citizens Advice, but I think putting the responsibility on the developer to declare that many different outlets are available to achieve financial viability for new buyers in the area, I think would be a as equally important route to follow.
Yeah. Well, Chairman, one of the things we could explore, and Mrs. Green might feel a little more comfortable with some of these suggestions, is that if we were to offer, or as part of the planning process, that we would require new tenants or occupants of buildings to have a community pack, or for us to ask developers to issue a community pack. That community pack could be full of lots of other information. It could be full of information about local rail stations, and basically it could be a neutral source of advice about schools and transport connections, work, average wages, all that kind of stuff. And in there, we could then put information about the range of advice available to people in terms of finances. And I think that might be, sure, whether we can make that a condition of planning, I doubt. But I certainly think we could make it something that if you're dealing with Dartford, you should expect to be asked. And that we can, we're not allowed to be pejorative in planning if someone doesn't do something, but we can at least make it clear that we're quite dissatisfied with the way that some developers operate if they are not being open with people about. It's not even just about financial arrangements. I mean, we all have cases where people have moved on to developments and not even been aware that there is this commitment or that commitment once they're there, or that somehow the bus service that they saw over there isn't actually free after all. It has to be paid for. And all those kind of things happen. And I think it would be interesting for us to perhaps have a sort of an open, outward-looking bit of information, which is more general than just finances. But we can explore that. But we have to be very careful what we do. It's been interesting, though.
From my distant past working with house builders and marketing, there's some of them used to do that, but of course it's all additional cost to their marketing budget, which is an interesting one, but something we could encourage, especially those buildings. Strange enough, it's still in Dartford and Ebbsfleet, because there's a lot of people moving into the area, as we've said, from outside the area, who've got absolutely no idea what goes on, and there's a lot of good things that go on in Dartford that they may not necessarily be aware of. So it is something I think that we could definitely look into, and it's possibly something that we can discuss further at a future meeting. So,
Chairman, forgive me, we're all running rings around, worrying about what Mrs. Green thinks. Does Mrs. I mean, perhaps.
Oh, Mrs. Green's got a hand up. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, great. I mean, is anything we've said not correct? I mean, have we actually got more powers than we might assume we have here, Sherry, or are we right to say that actually we've got to be incredibly careful and we're quite limited?
No, I think you're absolutely right to say that we have to be very careful, and we are very limited. A lot of the things that we've been talking about, they're not really matters for planning, because they're not intrinsically about land use. So they're not planning issues. But I do think that there are ways in which we could facilitate some of the ideas we've spoken about. We do signpost to lots of different organisations in lots of different ways. So I think there's no reason why we didn't be a little bit creative on some of these ideas, but perhaps not exactly in the way that you've talked about them.
Yeah. Mrs. Green.
That was the great telling off of April the 7th.
I didn't see it as telling off. I saw it merely as aligning our thoughts in the correct direction. So that was I thank you very much for that, Mr. Green. I apologise for not seeing your little hands up in the corner. That's fantastic. Is there any more from anyone at all? Well, can I just say thank you so very much for sparing the time and joining us today. I think that has been exceptionally useful to us, and it really has it's given me lots of things to think about. So I think that, there will probably other members of this board will go away and think about a lot of these items. We have another item coming up which might tie into this. But yes, thank you very much. I think, as Mrs. Green said, there is ways around this. It's typical that I said that Sonia wasn't going to be needed today, when in fact she probably was needed today. But that's not a problem. We can come around that. But again, thank you so much for sparing us your time. Time is money, as they say. But hopefully we will find a way of ensuring people get the full story, not just bits of the story that some people wish to tell them. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. I'm not too sure about protocol, Mr. Twyman. Are our guests allowed to stay with us, or it's a public meeting, so if you want to stay and watch the rest of the meeting, then you're more than welcome. Is that okay, Mr. Twyman?
You're quite correct, Chairman. It's an open meeting, so if your guests wish to stay for the rest of the meeting, they're welcome to do so.
It's open to cats as well, Councillor Allen. Thank you. I hope that's a cat. Oh, it is. Yes, it's scary. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Twyman, were you okay with that? Because there was a lot of information flying around there. I could almost hear your pen scribbling in the background.
Well, you certainly couldn't, Chairman, because I was muted. But yes, I've taken most of that down.
Oh, never underestimate me. Thank you very much indeed. Well, in that case, we will move then on to item 7, which is the Dartford Strategic Housing Mosaic update. And I see here that the chairman will provide an oral update on progress to the Strategic Housing Board. Just very quickly, for those of you who are not aware of what this is, we did talk in length over a couple of meetings about the fact that we felt people were not fully aware of the information that was available to them actually on the existing Dartford website. And what we thought was that we needed to identify our different customer groups and the status they may well be in, so that we could then direct them towards an appropriate action. So we created something which we referred to as the Mosaic, which was actually, it's effectively, it's sort of, you can't see it very well, but that's a blank piece of paper really, but it was a bit like battleships. We had a Gantt sheet which we followed different axes. Over a couple of meetings, we had knocked together the different areas that we wanted to focus in on. And my thanks to Jackie Pye and her team for taking this on and starting to put together what we hope is going to be an intuitive IT solution for people trying to find their way through our website. So, Jackie, could I ask you to? Oh, sorry, Mr. Twyman, can I ask you to put up the first screen, please? First identity.
Chairman, if you just give me a second.
Absolutely. What Mr. Twyman's about to put up is effectively the first screen. The strange piece of paper that I waved in front of the screen earlier was actually a Gantt chart, which identified, as I said, different groups and their needs. At the very bottom of this, I'm not sure if we can see the very bottom item of this particular slide. We can go down as far. That's the one. Right at the very bottom, there is it's a test system at the moment, so we're referring to it as Mosaic, but that was really our work in progress title. So we've really got to think of a new name for that. But strangely enough, the word that's been bouncing around this meeting so far, and I think is very descriptive of what we're trying to do, is not Mosaic, it's signposting. So basically, if people wanted to try and find out something about housing and how they can find their way into the housing market, they would go onto this first page of the website, find at the bottom what we now call Mosaic, what would be called housing signposts. We have yet to agree that. If they then clicked onto that Mosaic stroke signpost icon, they would then go through magically to the next level, which Mr. Twyman will be presenting in a second. There you go. They would then identify from this particular list who they were or what they were. So you have a list of different sort of situations ranging from basically a homeless applicant all the way through to an ex-offender. The idea then is if they could identify what they were or who they are on this list, they would then click onto that particular linking, which will take us to the next screen. Thank you, Mr. Twyman. And this at the moment is effectively, it's not the full list of different opportunities, but there will be a full list of opportunities. They then identify where they are. So if they're homeless, being made homeless, with links in Dartford, they then connect with that next point, and that would automatically take them through to the housing advice team. And that is how it would work throughout the whole arrangement. Difficult for those of you who haven't seen the mosaic in the first place, but there are lots and lots of different solutions to people's needs. And the idea really is that we will be able to automatically take them from this page, or an extension of this page, into the department they need to speak to. So there won't be a lot of searching around. They'll be able to go straight there. That is the story so far. And we just really wanted to push that in front of people to see whether they were happy that this is the direction we should be taking, take on board any other advice. Of course, an element of this would be a situation where somebody is, say, a first-time buyer without a mortgage, and they would then have to be taken somewhere. And that somewhere could be to a panel of financial advisors, or it could be to a list of local house builders, things like this. So we've still got to actually create those landing points, but we're getting there. And I think that the whole question of a board of financial advisors, either through the Citizens Advice Bureau or whatever they're called now, I think Citizens Advice, that would be a useful direction. Have I described that in any way that anyone actually understood? Oh, well done. Well, thanks, Adrian. I'm not going to rely on you. I can't see everybody on my screen now. I think we can go back to the full screen now, if that's all right, so Mr. Twyman. Thank you. Jackie, did you want to add anything to that?
I just wanted to say really that it is a work in progress, and at the time we took the screenshots, we were sort of halfway through. What we are going to end up with will be something quite different, a lot more information, but that should happen quite quickly. So we should, within the next few weeks, we should see a final product that we can look at and agree on. So it shouldn't take long, really.
Can I just also thank you, because originally, it has to be said that when Jackie first approached IT, they said go away because they were too busy. So thank you very much for finding a way around that and actually making this happen. Is there any questions so far from folk about this before we move?
Well, only from me, Chairman, which I think I think the aspiration we had at the beginning was that it should be a bit more of a graphical interface than we have. I mean, I think that what I seem to be looking at there is the right algorithm, the right way through and steering. But I think what we've got to try and do is get onto IT to see if there's any way we can make it a little more graphical, so that maybe people can choose from a series of very obvious pictures on a page that that describe their positions and almost navigate through a series of of questions, really, which boils down to their position. I think the problem with councils, we always use council words for everything, and I don't think people necessarily fall into those categories. But I agree. I mean, it does look, from what you've seen there, the algorithm I think is absolutely spot on. It will lead them to the right information. I just think it's a case of trying to make it more attractive. But perhaps the thing to do is to float it out there, see what interest it has, and then we could invest further if it actually starts to get traction, couldn't we?
I think you're exactly right. It would certainly be a lot more intuitive if we did do it that way. I think that was the issue really with IT, that they were so bogged down with stuff that they couldn't jump on board and do exactly what we wanted. But this would actually help us embed some sort of algorithm which we could see, and we could investigate and interrogate, make sure it works, and then I think you're quite right, we can take it on from there. But one of the things we've also got to think about is then how we tell people that it's there in the first place. So I think that's going to be an exercise in itself. I know that Housing have a number of other communication initiatives that they're looking at the moment to inform the public and our own customers about things or changes to policy like ASB. We may need to think of something as well. In a more, as you say, quite rightly say, a graphic form, so people can actually see how it goes, and we're going to have to promote it accordingly. I think the objective of this exercise really was to show people the progress that it had made, And I think that probably we will see how much progress we make in the next month or so. And maybe outside this meeting, offer the opportunity to members of the board to actually, as I say, interrogate the system, work their way around it, tear it to pieces, and then we can then think about how we are going to, say, introduce people to phase one. If they like phase one, we can then identify a way of making it even better, if you know what I mean. That's terrible English, and I apologize. But is that okay with most folk? I see nods. That's good. As I say, our guests here today may well form part of this ultimately, either through citizens' advice or through the council. But it will be a way of introducing people into your services, not necessarily to you exactly, but into the service that you provide, and then they can then take the opportunity to decide who they possibly want to use. But at least it identifies to people that there is nice people out there that will help them with their financial requirements.
Yeah. Chairman, there used to be, when I was growing up, there used to be, I think it was Penguin Books or someone like that, used to produce these kind of adventure books where you used to sort of, you start off at number 1 and then it said, if you want to kill a gnome with a large sword, go to number 3. If you want to use an Armalite rifle, go to number 7 or something. And then you'd go to different paragraphs and you'd navigate yourself around. Now, I actually think there's a bit of a possibility there for this in terms of a a hard copy, a little leaflet that might only be 16 pages or 12 pages long, which basically we then could put out to citizens' advice, and it basically would be the general guide to housing in Dartford, where people could navigate through from question 1 and find themselves to the right page very quickly, and then have all the resources at the back in a way, because I'm trying to arm's length us from all this, because councils aren't very good at updating things. So the minute we do this, it will start to degrade. And secondly, we also have a legal obligation not to get too involved in any endorsement or signposting. Really, we've only signposted a limited way. So, but I think that might work. So perhaps we should look at the sort of hard copy version of this, which we can then basically put out to everybody. No,
I like that. It's basically a flow diagram, really, of identity, and it shows a route to go. If you get to this point where you need to go here, go here, go here. Yeah, I'll have a think about that as well, actually, because there must be ways of doing that. And we can then link it in with our own website. To be honest with you, a lot of the stuff that's going to be coming out of this signposting on Mosaic will be directing people into our own housing departments, appropriate departments within the housing department. Any externals will be a case of go and have a look at. But, I think that's a very good idea. And I do think that we do need, even in this wonderful age of online this and online that, we do need a bit of hard copy out there as well, so that's fine. Okay, any more for that? Jeremy, you okay? Excellent, lovely. All right, so I think we will take next actions on this. We'll take it on a bit, but I will also look at the the flow diagram aspect to this as well, and we will inform the board of progress even before the next board meeting, in case we can start moving this on before we actually all gather together. Okay, I think that's about all we can do on that particular subject. Excellent. We will now move on to the private sector stock condition survey. And I will pass it over to you, Jackie, to take us on from here.
Thank you, Chair. This report is being presented to the board today to basically update members on the results of the recent private sector stock condition survey that was carried out in Dartford. The council engaged the BRE Group, who are a well-known company in the area of stock modelling, and they've produced a detailed report on the condition of both the private owned and the rented stock in Dartford. Their methodology was desktop based, and they had a large sample of addresses was used to extrapolate the data to get a sort of borough-wide picture of the overall condition of the stock in the borough. In the report in front of you, there's a list of headline findings for Dartford. I won't go through them all because there is quite a few, but some examples of that are around 3,000 dwellings contain category 1 hazard, which is measured by something called the Health and housing health rating system. I think that's right. Housing health, yeah, hazard rating system. And that means that they are, category 1 is the most serious hazard. Yeah, there's about 3,000 dwellings they've estimated where these hazards are occurring. SAP ratings are pretty good, although there are quite a few dwellings in Dartford with low EPC ratings, but overall the SAP ratings are above average, slightly above average. And there are 784 houses in multiple occupation, which 141 of them should be licensed, which means that they need to be mandatory licensed, which means the council has an obligation to license these HMOs. That means that there's 5 or more persons in forming more than one household, so that they would be mandatory licensed. So as a result of the report and the findings, we will now look to develop a private sector renewal strategy for Dartford, which will hopefully try and address some of the issues that have been found. Obviously, we only know about a hazard if it's reported to us, or if we find it, or if someone reports it to the council. So although they've identified 3,000 dwellings that could have a hazard, we don't exactly know where they are. But that's something that we need to think about in terms of targeting when we develop the strategy for Dartford for our private sector renewal. So I'm happy to try and answer any questions you have, if you have any.
Do I see any questions? I have an observation in 4.5. It's fascinating that I will do the HHSRS hazards in private rented sector found in wards Newtown, strangely enough, Longfield, New Barn, Stowfleet and Swanscombe. One might have thought Newtown and Swanscombe, but I am surprised at the others. But it could well be that these are older properties, I guess. Is the age of the property, do you think, have any influence on these particular statistics?
It may do, Chair. There's probably more detail in the full report, so but I would assume that might be the case, yes.
Any other observations? Any questions anybody like to bring?
Well, I was just thinking, Chairman, when you said about the age, sometimes it's about the age profile that sometimes people, you know, like myself, you know, people move in, they decorate, and then you stick with something for 20 years before you do something else again, or you update. And I think sometimes they're older people, they're more reluctant to upgrade the heating or upgrade things like that, or put in a new bathroom, or maybe they're going to change to a shower. So I think that might be something in the age profile as well of the people who are in those properties.
Very good point, Anne. And I'd remind you that we can actually see the decoration in the behind you in your house, and it looks very nice. It's been there a long time. It's interesting because under 4.6 it does talk about fuel property, and I think that fuel poverty, and I think that is specific in the locations that it identifies, and I think that is where our older population are. So it is definitely something we need to take into consideration. Jackie, can you just enlighten us as to the next steps for this particular report? What will happen now? Because we'll note it at this meeting, I guess, but what is the next stages?
We'll start looking at the development of the private sector renewal strategy from the findings from this report. And that will be with the private sector housing team. And it will take some time to develop, but we will then go to Cabinet for approval of that sometime later in the year, I would imagine.
So, and that sounds silly, but BRE, I always thought BRE was British Research Establishment. I take it it's not that BRE.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Okay, but it was interesting because I must admit, as soon as I read it, I thought,
yeah, it just says BRE. It doesn't sound like it's an acronym for anything, but it might be.
Okay, that's fine. Excellent. So I think that's do I take it then we are just noting this as an item? I think that's correct, isn't it? In which case, yes, we will note it if everyone's happy. Okay. Then, to be honest with you, we're on to item 9, which is data of next and future meetings. Before we go on to number 9, can I just, it's not really on the agenda, but it's sort of chairman's remarks. Peter Dosad isn't with us today, but I think this would have been his last meeting in his current position as head of housing. He will be now moving on and up. And I'd just like it recorded to say thank you very much for his support in this particular area over the years. And I understand he will be replaced by Mr. Costa, which is a familiar name to many of us. And I wish him well as well in his future. Mrs. Green will also be moving on to make space for, I guess, Mr. Dosad. Thank you again for all your help. As I said before, you must be getting very bored with all these adulations that are being heaped upon you, but they are well worth it. But thank you very much indeed. Thank you for all your help. Okay, and we'll move now onto section 9 or agenda 9. Point 9 is the next meeting, which will be the 14th of July. Depending on road maps, plans, whatever you want to call it, it will, I imagine, be a Zoom meeting. If in fact we are clear to see each other, then I'm sure that we'll be informed, or you'll be informed accordingly. I just want to take another opportunity to thank you very much to our friends from the financial services sector for joining us today and helping us and enlightening us. Is there anything else anybody else would like to add to the meeting before I close it officially? I see no indication.
Please, Chairman, one quick thing. First of all, I want to echo the thanks to Mrs. Green. She may find the adulation uncomfortable, but I can tell you, I get used to it, and it's very nice, and it's good that people are willing to express themselves. You have been a great servant to Dartford, and we're going to miss you terribly. You've been an amazing guide and assistance to us in terms of our work as a town, and there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people actually over the years who've benefited from the advice that you've given and the way we've steered this town together as a team. And it's like we are going to miss you terribly. I know you're here for a little while longer yet, but we are going to miss you. In terms of going forward, Anne Allen and I had a meeting about something entirely different yesterday with the YMCA. And one of the things that emerged out of that, Chairman, was the possibility that we might want to add in some strategic housing partners into this group going forward, and that the YMCA might be one of them. So I just want to flag that so that we're open with members, that I think perhaps in the intervening period between now and July, we ought to, perhaps on a cross-party basis with members, just discuss that, because I think the YMCA are very, very keen to become involved in housing, and their aims are our aims to some degree, and I think it'd be useful for us to explore with them the possibility that they might have a seat here, and perhaps even others might have a seat here. So just to explore that, Chairman, is that all right?
I'm so pleased you mentioned that, Jeremy, because I think you're quite correct with the YMCA. They're an extremely important partner in our agency partner with housing. I've done a couple of their sleep out exercises, sleeping in a field, or rather out in the Central Park. And I must admit, last year I sat around a campfire talking to somebody about housing for most of the evening. So I think they have an awful lot that they can contribute to us here within this board. So I think that's an excellent idea. I'll further that as well. So that's excellent. No, that's great. Anything else? No. In that case, I will officially close the meeting at 8 minutes past 3. Thank you all very much for your attendance. It's always great to see you. Stay safe, stay well, and we will meet again. Sounds like a song, doesn't it? All the best. Thank you very much. I'll just hang on a bit and speak to Mr. Twyman before I sign off. But thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.